Lolo, Montana, Dunrovin Ranch, on a rather cool afternoon.
Yep.
Tori's doing better than I am in terms of being a hot-blooded animal here. I'm all warmed up here with my winter coat. I'd like to introduce you to Tori. Tori Ritter is with Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks, and he has come out in the past. Those of you who have been with us for some time, you came out last April, did you not? And
Yeah.
yeah. Talked about ospreys. Yeah.
Yep.
And tell us a little bit about your job at Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks, Tori.
So I'm a non-game wildlife biologist, which basically means that if you don't fish for it, hunt it, or trap it, those are the things that are in my wheelhouse. So that's songbirds, woodpeckers, small mammals, reptiles, amphibians, all sorts of the kind of different stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then I also work on lands projects, like buying a fishing access site or a conservation easement, things like that. So protecting habitat and working on all the little critters.
Yeah. I want to give a plug for Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks. I've been involved with natural resource management in various states and in fact, all around the world. And Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks has an excellent reputation for being very professional and also being very much loved by your constituents. It's important.
Most of them.
Yeah, most of them.
I like to think most of them.
Yeah, but that's important because wildlife management is in many ways people management, is it not?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you have to know about the wildlife and you have to know how to deal with people. It's kind of a...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, first of all, we want to say happy Thanksgiving weekend, and I'm really delighted that Tori agreed to come back out here so we could talk a little turkey. And I have to admit, Tori, that I was amazed once I started reading about them, just what interesting critters they are.
Yeah.
You know, when I was a child, I was here in the 50s, and we didn't have turkeys then. So can you tell us how turkeys, number one, came into Montana?
Yeah, so turkeys are actually not native to Montana. Basically, they were native to sort of the southeastern and eastern part of the country. Mm-hmm. And then they were nearly extirpated back sort of during the 1800s, 1900s, when a lot of our wildlife species were overexploited as we were settling the United States. So because turkeys are this really great game animal, it's got a lot of meat and they're fairly easy for hunters to get. They were reintroduced to a lot of areas in the lower 48 states to basically establish huntable populations. Mm-hmm. And the Bitterroot Valley and parts, pretty much all of Montana was a part of that reintroduction. So in the 50s, there were state wildlife agencies reintroducing these wild turkeys to various areas.
Yeah.
And it's been very successful because turkeys are highly adaptable and can have a lot of babies.
Yeah. I do remember there was a farm near Deer Lodge that had a lot of game animals, game fowl that Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks are. You weren't named that at that time, I don't believe.
Oh yeah, I can't remember what our name was before.
But yeah, but they had a place where they bred some of the birds that they would then release.
Oh, okay. I didn't know
right
that.
near Deer Lodge, Montana.
Oh, cool.
I would drive by that at any rate.
Yeah.
So I didn't grow up knowing about them, and when we moved back to Dunrovin, I really didn't see them that often. But once we put up the bird feeder, and the birds are a messy lot, by the way, they scattered them all over, and so we started getting the turkeys coming. And I have to say, I've so enjoyed them. Let's just start with the difference between the male and the female first. There's quite an age difference, quite a size difference. Can you put that photo up, James, for me, please? The males are considerably larger.
Yeah, they're a lot larger. So males can be anywhere from like 14 up to 25, 26 pounds.
That's
so
a big
really
bird.
big birds. And then the females are like 7 to 15 pounds, so much smaller.
Yeah.
And that's mostly because the males have to do this very competitive fighting amongst each other and attracting mates in order to be successful breeders.
Right.
So they've evolved to have this big body size and these really extravagant feathers and these sort of extra features for fighting that allow them to compete for those females.
Why don't you bring the next slide up, James, because we could talk about some of those features that make them so distinctive.
Yeah.
In fighting, they have spurs, and could you explain how what they're used for?
Yeah, yeah. So their feet, they have. You can kind of separate a lot of bird groups out by looking at their feet. And feet tell you a lot about what they do. Turkeys have just kind of very regular clawed feet that they use for scratching at the surface of the ground, basically. So they're scratching at leaves, they're scratching at pine needles, looking for all the stuff they want to eat. And then right above those claws on the males, and actually the females have a smaller one, but the males have a big, what's it called, tarsus, which is or a spur, sorry. Mm-hmm. So the spur is basically this big dagger-looking thing that comes off the back of the foot. And so when males are fighting, they're hitting each other with their wings, or they're trying to get that leg around. They're kicking, and they're trying to get that spur around to.
They're deadly too. I mean,
yeah,
it's sharp, isn't it?
It's very sharp. Yeah. And for the same thing, if a predator tries to get them, they'll use that to their advantage. And when the males are fighting, they'll actually try to hook their necks around each other. And sort of the way they win a fight is they get their neck hooked around one of the other males, and they sort of pin it to the ground. And that's sort of their dominance. I won the fight moment at that moment. So yeah, really good for defense, but also for fighting. And of course, when hunters shoot a turkey, if it's got big spurs, that's one of the things they look at as like, this is a really mature
Dominant.
Big male. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
kind of a trophy.
Yeah.
In the hunting world. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
or the length of the beard is another thing, or just
So
overall body size.
Let's talk about those other features. I mean, you don't
Sure.
see beards on many other birds, do you?
No, and I can't even think of another bird at the moment.
So look on that chart that James has on the screen there. You'll see the beard comes out of the chest, and they're feathers, but they look like fur. I mean, they're so fine, are they not?
Yeah, they're they're just called filaments. So it's the same components as a feather. I think it has the middle I can't remember the technical term for it, but the stem going down the middle, and then it has little feather-like things coming off of it. But a lot of those really interesting features that make those birds so unique looking, those males, are all about putting on a display for mating. So it's, when females are inspecting those males and thinking about which one do they want to let breed with them, they're looking for those males that have a long beard, a very colorful head, a big fan tail that doesn't have a lot of feathers missing or chunks taken out of the feather, and that nice iridescent sheen. All of those little features kind of trigger in their brain as, oh, this is very clearly a mature breeding male.
Good genes.
Yeah, good genes, exactly. They're all just giving them that signal.
Yeah.
So the males puff themselves out and they do their little dance. They strut around, they fan their tail out, they drag their feathers along the ground, they make all these different noises.
Yeah.
And all of that is just not only letting the other males know, I'm dominant, don't mess with me, but also indicating the females, I'm the one you want.
Yeah, yeah. And they have some special headgear, don't they? That are again unusual. The snoods and the gargoyles and the, I mean, lots of birds have wattles, but they're really geared up, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. So they have these basically bald heads, and they're very, very strange looking. If you look at them really closely, it kind of almost looks weird. But they have the snood, which is basically this protruding bit of skin that comes over the beak, and then the wattle, which is right below the neck, and then the carpicle, is which is this kind of fleshy thing that hangs down from the head. And again, those engorge with blood when they're mating, and they change colors. Turkey hunters will often say you should never wear red, blue, or white when you're out turkey hunting, because that looks so much like the head of a male turkey, you might accidentally get shot by another hunter.
Wow.
But as they go through that mating, you'll actually see those colors will shift around in their heads, and they'll get brighter and duller, and that can really change a lot right in that head area.
Yeah.
And that's really a heavy focus probably for those females looking for those breeding males.
So in talking about breeding, that would take place in the spring. Is that right? All this strutting and all this. And can you walk us through kind of the annual cycle of a turkey? I mean.
Yeah. So in the spring, so right now in the winter, there's these kind of mixed groups. There's males and females. There's some that are groups of juveniles from this year that are hanging out together. There might be groups of only big breeding males. But there's a lot of mixed groups, and that's because they're getting ready to survive the winter, which is, they kind of band up, stick together, and then you have more turkeys looking out, basically, for predators and things like that. So starting...
Safety in numbers.
Safety in numbers, yep.
Yeah.
Someone's always looking up and looking around that can warn the group.
Yeah.
And we see that in a lot of animals in the winter. Yeah. And then in the spring, usually starting late January, early February, the males, the days are getting longer and they start to get that internal change that tells them breeding season's coming up, and they'll actually start fighting and competing with each other several months before the females are receptive. So you'll start to hear those gobbles in the woods in February. And then come March, April, the females start coming into estrus, and now the males are really fighting with each other, and they're trying to get their own group of females, a harem. So pretty much the same thing elk do in a way. They're fighting with each other, they're displaying to the females, and they're trying to get their own group that they can breed with. And of course other males are always trying to come in and fight them off. And so it's
steal the females.
Yeah, it's an intense time period to be a, to be a male turkey. You gotta be on your toes. And then once the females have been mated, they'll go off on their own. The males will go off and form their bachelor groups, and the females will go off and nest. And then once they have young ones, they usually get back into fairly large groups. There can be single family groups, but oftentimes you'll have multiple family groups. Then you'll have a lot of young ones running around. You can get groups of 30, sometimes 40 turkeys in these really big
So several
groups.
females combining their broods. And you said that the broods can be, what, 12 to...
Yeah, average number of eggs they lay is like 12 to 15, but they can lay up to 26, 27 at a time.
Yeah.
So you can end up with, if they're really successful and nothing eats their eggs or kills a lot of their young ones, you can have these really big groups of turkeys, big family groups.
And I have seen the eggs here at Dunrovin, and they're ground nesters, aren't they? And they don't really make much of a nest. They get it just seems like a little bit of a dip in the ground, and that's it.
Yeah, they'll just scrape out a little depression, usually in some thick shrubs or like downfall trees, something that gives them a lot of cover.
Right. The ones I've seen have been in hawthorns.
Oh, yeah,
those are perfect.
Yeah, nothing wants to go into hawthorns.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And so then, how long do they incubate?
I'm trying to remember how long they incubate. I'm not sure on that one. For sure.
Yeah.
But the young ones emerge, or the eggs usually hatch in May, and then the young ones are pretty much immediately able to get up and start running around and rooting for food. And then they'll stay with the mom for about 10 months before they're completely independent.
And the mother doesn't feed the chicks. She shows them where to find food, but she doesn't actually feed them. Is that right?
I think for a few weeks initially she does feed them. Again, just by eating stuff and then regurgitating it like a lot of birds do. But very quickly they start eating. Insects are especially important. They pop out in May, June, which is when we're just flush with insects in a place like this. So it's really well timed for them to pop out and be ready to eat insects right when a lot of them start showing up. Same with like buds of trees come out right around that time, and even some berries are showing up. So that's mainly what they're going after.
So let's talk about what they do eat. I mean, they're not confined to seeds and insects, are they? I mean, they're pretty, what would you call them? They have a very large, wide diet. Is that correct? So give us some information on that.
So the majority of what they eat are plant material. So berries, buds of different shrubs, those kind of things. But they do have a very flexible diet. So they also eat a lot of, like I said, grasshoppers, invertebrates. Snails is a big one in some areas. Yeah. And then they'll even eat things like snakes and reptiles and salamanders. So there's actually, from my perspective as a non-game biologist, turkeys can actually be a little bit of a mixed issue, because when they in late summer, when they hang around small riparian areas, like little pocket wetlands, a group of 30 turkeys moving through with a voracious appetite can basically kill a lot of those reptiles, amphibians, snakes that are hanging around those wetlands.
And those are important for the whole ecology.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're just, especially like frogs and salamanders, those amphibian species are really, really having tough times lately with, warming climate and more isolated wetlands that are drying out quicker and those sorts of things.
Pesticides and herbicides.
Pesticides, big one, definitely.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about the hunting regulations for turkeys. People can hunt here in Montana.
Yep.
Are they widely hunted?
Yeah, turkeys are one of the most sought after game animals, and I think I read something, at least in the eastern United States, turkeys are the only thing more popular than turkeys are deer for hunting.
Is that right? Yeah.
And they're highly sought after not only because they produce a lot. I mean, you get a lot of meat out of shooting a turkey, right. But also they're kind of like bugling in an elk. It's a really interesting and nuanced pursuit of turkeys, trying to call them in and trying to evade them and not give away your position. They're very intelligent because they're birds, right. And so it's this. It's kind of
a game.
Yeah.
It's a lot of
so people have a lot
skill
of fun.
Needed.
Yeah, calling them in, hiding in the bushes.
So how did they call them in, and what? I mean, in elk, they bugle to signal because the males are bugling to get the females. But in the fall, since that's not breeding season for turkeys like it is for elk, what are they calling them with? What's the sound that they make? What are they trying to get their attention with in a turkey call?
Yeah, so we actually have spring and fall turkey seasons, so you can hunt them in the spring. So in the spring, and I'm not much of a turkey hunter, so this is just based on the few, I'm talking to a few people about it.
Okay.
But basically, as I understand it, you can either go for the technique of imitating a male, so doing that classic gobble that turkeys are really well known for. That can attract females, but more often than not, it gets other males wanting to come fight with you. So you can use that male call, or you can use these hen clucks, which are kind of just a short, quick, high-pitched sound, and that can get the males to come strutting in with their big chest puff out. So a lot of times when hunters end up taking a turkey, that turkey is fully puffed out because he thinks he's found a female,
right.
And so he pops out in the meadow fully puffed up, and then
right. Bang.
Boom. Yeah. So in the fall, I'm actually not sure how exactly it works in the fall in terms of calling them in and how you get that response. This is actually really interesting. I wrote this down because I wanted to, I was looking in, the Birds of North America is this big effort where they try to compile a lot of information about different bird species into one spot.
Right.
And they named all the different sounds that turkeys make.
Oh my goodness.
So I just wanted to read these off because they're pretty funny. So there's the gobble, which is the one that can attract mates. The gobble, 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 gobble. The one we're all pretty used to.
Good. You did a good
Thank you.
job.
I practiced a lot before.
That's great.
And then there's something called the shock gobble.
Shock gobble.
Yeah, so it's the same sound, but it's in response to just a loud noise. So sometimes, like the hooting of an owl will elicit shock gobbles, or
so it's more of an alarm.
It's almost like an innate response, like they can't help themselves for some reason. It's not really well known why they do it, but like even like a really loudly creaking door can cause it.
Really?
I remember when I was a kid out here in the Bitterroot Valley, we just made this random noise out in the woods. We were just yelling, trying to make echoes in a canyon, and we kept getting these turkeys to gobble back at us. I never knew what it was until I read about the shock gobble.
Interesting.
So there's also the plain yelp, the tree yelp, the lost yelp.
The tree yelp. Now, did you practice any of these sounds?
I didn't. I haven't heard them all. No. I just thought the names
people
were
will
really
have
fun.
to look them up online.
There's the assembly yelp of hen, hatchling yelp, plain cluck, alarm putt, predator alarm, cackle, plain purr. There's even more: rattle, feeding call, hissing call, threat cooing, and then non-vocal drumming.
My goodness.
So they really have a really wide repertoire of sounds that they can make, and they all mean different things and show up at different times of the year. Some are to, like if there's a predator around and the female wants her young ones to freeze and just stay low and camouflage, she actually has a special sound for that.
Wow.
And then she'll try to lead the predator away, and she keeps making that sound, and that's how the young ones know to just stay still and freeze.
Freeze.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because those of us who watch the ospreys have come to, read their language.
Oh, yeah.
And I had no idea that turkeys were that, varied in their vocalizations.
Yeah, I didn't know that either, actually, until I read about that. It's cool.
Yeah, it's very cool, very cool. So let's talk about the domestication of turkeys. This fascinated me, and James, maybe you would bring up the map that we had. It turns out that turkeys are only only occur in the Americas. They're not a European or Asian bird. And it really, but they were domesticated by the ancient peoples of Mexico and Central America, right? And my understanding is that, you know, with the arrival of the Europeans very early in their arrival, they recognized these as a potentially good bird to eat.
Yeah.
And they took them back to Europe, and that's part of how they got their name. Was people had identified guinea birds, and a turkey is a guinea bird, is it not?
Yeah, they're in the family called Galliform, which includes the pheasants, quails, chicken, and grouse. And so that includes what you call the guinea fowl.
Yeah, and they recognized this as one of them, and evidently the original route for guineas getting into Europe was through Turkey, from Asia.
Huh, I didn't know that actually.
Yeah.
I was kind of wondering about that. Yeah.
I can see we use different sources, but that's good, isn't it? That's great. And so that's how they got their name, Turkey.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Huh.
And of course, the Europeans had a much more advanced breeding programs than the ancient Americans did. And so they really started breeding them for size of eating, for mostly eating, and kept very confined. So they lost their ability to fly by breeding for size of the chest, which, according to Ken Dial, you know who Ken Dial is here at the University of Montana. He's an ornithologist, He studies birds in flight, and so he postulates that the domestication of turkeys not only impacted their the size of their breasts, but also the connection with their shoulders, because they stopped exercising.
Yeah.
They stopped using their shoulders for any kind of flight, and so they kind of, you know, what do you call it when they diminish in size?
Atrophy.
Atrophy. Thank you very much. That's the word I was looking for. Atrophy.
I can't believe I remembered that word. That's probably the first time I've used it in my whole life.
Yeah, but the other thing he pointed out to me in reading his article was their legs. Turkeys spend the vast majority of their time on the ground, don't they?
Yeah. Yeah, so most turkeys will prefer to try to run away from a predator rather than fly. And that's mostly because flight is really costly for them.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of energy to lift that big body off the ground.
Right.
And so they have this wing form it's almost round when you look at it fully spread out. I mean, it's just such a big, like,
Massive
lifting,
area.
it's almost like a parachute, so that when they do beat those wings, they're moving as much air as possible.
Yeah.
And so they really have to, they make a big leap with those big leg muscles,
Yes.
and then they're flapping really hard. And oftentimes the only time you'll see them fly is when they're heading back to the roost at night, or when they're leaving that roost in the morning. Unless you really chase one down, and then finally they'll fly if they really, really have to.
Right.
But you can hear how much effort it takes. I mean, when you hear them take off, you can hear it from a really long ways away, and that's just because they're moving so much air so quickly trying to get up off the ground.
Yeah. And according to Ken, this burst using their legs is fairly unique to turkeys, in that their legs have evolved to allow them to do that. That most large birds that weigh that much need more room to take off as opposed to just jumping into the air. And Ken points out that their legs are spread wide apart to balance that weight of their body, and that they have their knee is a little bit different. They can squat and jump.
Huh.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Isn't that very
I didn't
cool?
know about that. That's really cool. Yeah.
And I was also read that they can actually fly for short distances because it is so energy intense, but they can reach speeds of 50 to 60 miles an hour.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really impressive.
Yeah, and if you've ever been in a meadow at dusk and they start streaming overhead, it is really fast. And basically what they do is they jump up and they fly up, and then they just glide. And that's when they hit those really high speeds. And so it's a thing you can hear them going overhead. It's like,
I'd like to hear that. Now that I know that they roost, tell me about roosting. They do this every night. They get into trees, right?
Yeah, so there's actually there's a lot of birds that roost. Turkey vultures are really well known for going back to the same tree every night, and it's basically it's a lot safer to be up off the ground at night when you're sleeping, because obviously ground is where the coyotes and the raccoons and the skunks are and all those kind of things that will either go after the young or may even go after adults. Like a coyote might go after an adult. So in the evening, usually right about the time the light is fading from the sky, turkeys will lift off either individually or in a big group, and then they'll all just stream towards big conifer or probably big cottonwood trees as well. They're looking for big trees that have big diameter branches. The big diameter branches seems to be the important thing.
Well, they're a heavy bird.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so they'll get up in those trees, and then they'll usually land on the lower limbs, and then they kind of just hop their way up to wherever they want to be on the tree, and then they'll spend the night there. And then in the morning, they'll take off from that tree and go back out to being on the ground all day.
And this is in a group.
Yep. Yeah,
Yeah.
they'll do those in groups. I mean, there are times where single turkeys will do it, but I think they always prefer to be in a group. They're definitely a group animal.
So during the winter, if they don't have Dunrovin to feed them at the bird feeder, and there's a lot of snow, I assume that they scratch and they just dig in the snow to find food, or do they eat berries on trees? All of that, huh?
Yeah, mostly berries in the winter, I would think. The shrubs, hawthorn, snowberry, those kind of plants that stick up above the snow a little bit.
Right.
And then also going to the base of trees and rooting around is probably another way they survive in the winter. But yeah, feeding is an interesting thing. What you generally hear is that once you start feeding turkeys, a lot more turkeys show up.
Boy.
They seem to learn very quickly where the feeding sources are. So
That's happening here.
yeah,
It is.
yeah, we get a lot of some of our biologists here in the Bitterroot Valley get all these calls. People will feed the turkeys. They really love seeing them. And then come winter, they can't get the turkeys to leave, and they're pooping all over the deck, and they're just taking all the bird seed before any other bird gets it. So you have to find the right balance of, feeding them enough that they're around and you're interested in them, but not so much that they tell all the other turkeys, and then you've got 50 turkeys that won't leave your house.
No, we're not intentionally feeding the turkeys. It's I did a video yesterday. We had a flicker come, and they like the sunflower seeds, but they're messy. They're the worst. I mean, they're just awful. I love flickers, by the way, but they also eat the suet, and they're woodpeckers. Anyway, I get this great video of him just throwing the seed out. I mean, it was just flying, and I thought, well, it's no wonder we're feeding the turkeys. The flickers are spreading it around for us. So tell us about predation on turkeys. What are the main predators for turkeys?
So I was actually pretty surprised to read that adult turkeys don't have very many predators out there. And that's probably because they're really good at defending themselves. And they're in these big groups, so they're a little more intimidating to something like a coyote. But, coyotes and, maybe something like a golden eagle would probably go for, especially like females or juveniles. But they do suffer a lot of nest predation. So,
a lot of what?
Nest predation.
Nest predation, sure.
So skunks.
Around on the ground, yeah.
Yeah, skunks, raccoons, corvids like the ravens and jays and magpies, even bigger snakes like bull snakes will eat a lot of turkey eggs, and that's because again they're on the ground, and if there's 26 eggs in a, in a pile.
You can't miss them. I mean, if you walk by a turkey nest, it's there for sure.
And probably that big clutch size with a lot of eggs is probably some sort of adaptation to the fact that they're planning on losing some eggs to predation when they lay eggs.
Right. So the other little factoid that I came across was that they're one of the 5 largest birds of flight in the world.
Yeah, I didn't know that actually before I came here. That's really interesting.
Isn't that interesting?
And it makes sense.
It does, yeah.
Because I started thinking to myself, no, there's bigger birds out there, but then I'm thinking of the ostriches and the penguins and the things that don't actually fly. So
yeah,
getting 25 pounds off the ground is
that's substantial.
Yeah, it's a lot of effort.
It is, yeah. So I'm on the chat here, folks. If any of you have any questions that you'd like to ask of either me or Tori, we'd be happy to entertain some questions. I think both Tori and I took a little bit of a look at, because they are native to the Americas, a lot of the Native Americans have used them in in their traditions. Can you tell us a little something about the dances that you've seen and
Yeah.
the powwows?
Yeah, so a lot of traditional Native American dances are based upon, well, Native American culture in general was very, very tied to the landscape and to wildlife,
Right.
to plants and animal behavior.
Right.
So a lot of the Native American dances that you'll see at powwows or other spiritual gatherings imitate basically the mating displays of birds.
Yeah.
So you'll see the big fans of feathers that are in a lot of Native American dress, ceremonial dresses, and some of the movements they do are all kind of like grouse on the lek, or the male turkeys displaying to the females.
Right, kind of the
And a
strut
lot of,
and everything.
yeah, the strut, and even some of the drum beats they do and the sounds they'll make
Right.
are all very mimicking of those displays.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's, turkeys were a big deal to Native Americans back when they.
And their feathers. Their feathers are incredible. I mean, because they are coming so very close now to our web cameras, I have been falling in love with what I say is caress them with my camera. Now, they're hard to do because they're moving all the time.
Yeah.
They're pecking.
Yeah.
So it's hard to get them in focus for long enough. But I have never seen such varied feathers on a bird.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. The males have, there must be 6 different kinds of feathers.
Yeah.
I mean, they've got a skirt feathers that go down when they are performing or strutting, and they have, they're iridescent greens and blues and yellows. I mean, golds and very different kinds of copper and brown and white.
Yeah, they're beautiful.
They're incredible, aren't they?
They are incredible. It's kind of like the ringneck pheasant. It's just like so ornate. It almost looks fake sometimes. 'Cause
Yeah,
they're so colorful.
I mean, and yet from a distance they all look sort of drab brown. I mean, if you just see one over there, you think, oh, there's a big brown bird.
Yeah, that's what's fun when those males display. Like they'll pop out into a clearing, and they just look like a dark bird. And then when they fluff everything up, they fan their tail and they push out all their feathers. Then the light starts catching those iridescent greens, and you start to see just how varied it is. It's incredible.
It is. It's
Really
very
beautiful.
interesting. And somebody asked, why are turkeys considered such a dumb bird? And that's interesting. I mean, I think a lot of us have not looked hard enough to understand birds, don't you think?
Yeah, and it's always tough to say whether an animal is really dumb, because it's always based on, it's always compared to humans, which are this very different kind of species.
Right.
Birds in general, the group of animals known as birds, are known for being really, really intelligent. And I think turkey hunters that have been out pursuing turkeys would probably argue very strongly that they're very, very smart, or at least very, very keenly aware of what's going on.
Right.
But I have heard stories of experiments done where they've been able to get a male turkey to try to mate with a female, which was really just a stick with a fake female head on the top. So there's definitely certain environmental cues that are so strong for them that it can kind of make it seem like they're dumb.
Right.
But it's more just that breeding instinct and that takeover of their body that comes with breeding season that can make them do some very strange things.
Right.
And there's hunters out there with decoys that are just like just a tail fan basically, and they'll react to that as well. But even things like moose, moose will react to a big black sheet if you hang it up and make a bunch of moose noises. So it could be something to do with their eyesight or just that mating instinct. But it's tough to comment on the intelligence of animals. But I always like to think we're vastly underestimating them.
I agree with you. I saw a very interesting video. It was on Nature on public television some time ago. It was called The Turkey Man. Have you ever seen that?
I've heard of it, yeah, where he raised a
clutch of turkeys, and they never saw a turkey. He hung out at the at what would you call it, a turkey hutch. He had a turkey hutch, and he hung out with what are they called, Jakes and Jennies. The young ones. Anyway, this was in the southeast United States, and they started following him into the woods, and then pretty soon he was following them, and he learned to see his environment in a totally different way because they saw and understood the environment in ways that he could not. It was really interesting because he ended up learning a heck of a lot from the turkeys, you know, and things went south when they got mature because the males, of course.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it didn't work out after that. But it was a fascinating film because I think it showed exactly what you were talking about, that, you know, we interpret intelligence in certain ways, and we're not really giving animals credit for the fact that their intelligence has evolved to live in their environments and to move in their worlds, not our world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure if you dropped me out in the woods with just naked and said you survive and drop a turkey out there and tell it to survive, I would be dead in a week.
That's right.
Maybe a week, and it would probably be fine.
One of the things he said is he had no idea there were so many rattlesnakes around his house. No idea.
Oh, really?
And the turkeys could find every one of them.
Yeah.
Just absolutely knew where they were.
Yeah, that's a different level of intelligence where you're so in tune with the environment that tiny little cues give away things like that. I mean, they can probably tell the difference between wind rustling on the grass versus a snake rustling in the grass or something like that.
Right.
Yeah. So that's what happened there is called imprinting, where and I think ducks do this as well, where when they're really, really young, they're looking for a big giant shape that's always around. That's almost always the parent, So if they come out of the eggs and it's just a human there, they'll think that that's their mom. And then they'll just start following it around, and basically you can raise them.
Learn from it.
Yeah, so a lot of the research on turkey behavior, you'll constantly hear reference to imprinted turkeys were shown to do this, or imprinted turkeys did that. And that's because a lot of that research has come from people purposefully allowing a group to imprint on them and then sort of studying how they grow up from there.
Yeah, which really indicates there's a long maturation period for those young birds. I mean, they need that. And it's interesting when we watch the osprey, you know, they're watching and learning a lot more than we understand, you know, when they're, so very, very good. So another question: what kind of turkeys would we have here? We have two species of turkeys in Montana: the Merriam and the Eastern. So, and can you tell the difference in terms of the size or the color? Or?
So they're all the one species, the wild turkey, and then there's 5 or 6 recognized subspecies in North America, and they all have fairly subtle differences. It's usually size, or maybe their sounds are a little different. So in Montana, the most widespread one that we have almost everywhere is the Merriam's turkey. And it will have these white tips on the feathers. I believe that's a tail feather. Yeah. So on the tail feathers, they have a white tip.
Yeah.
The other species we have is confined mostly to the Flathead region, Flathead Valley, and that's the Eastern turkey. And that one will have copper tips on the tails. And there may be other differences. That was kind of the main one I read about, but that was they were all introduced, but the Eastern turkey was sort of what they call bucket biology, which was somebody decided they wanted that type of turkey around, so they got some and they released them, and they became a self-sustaining population. So I would say most likely if you see a turkey around, it's a Merriam's turkey in Montana.
Yeah, and these are clearly, this is what we have here because we have the tips and the, yeah, that's great. Well, does anybody have any other questions that we have? Here, let's see. What's their status right now? In the sense that you mentioned in the early part of this century or the last century, they were very depleted, but they've come back in full force, have they not? Yeah,
absolutely. Some people would even say we have too many now. Depends on who you ask. Depends on if you like turkey hunting. But basically the status is we don't fish, wildlife, and parks, and I don't know of a lot of other state agencies that do it. Well, I shouldn't say that. I know for Montana, we don't generally do reintroductions or putting more turkeys out there.
Right.
Basically, the approach we take, which is with most of our wildlife species, is if the habitat's there, they'll find it and they'll breed and they'll do as well as they can.
Right.
That's not to say if there was some, strange disease that came through and just wiped them out from the Bitterroot Valley, I'm sure there would be enough public support to bring those turkeys back. Right.
More of a reintroduction than a new introduction.
Exactly. Yeah. So we're definitely not worried about their populations. They seem to be doing fine. In some areas, there seem to be too many of them. So we're feeling good about turkeys. And
Yeah,
I don't
that's
think we
great.
need to do so
And
much.
another little factoid that I learned was that every state except Alaska has them.
Yeah, they're all over.
Yeah,
Yeah.
including Hawaii. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know Hawaii had them. Oh,
Yeah.
man. Well, that's not surprising. Hawaii is just about every non-native species that you can imagine.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Well, I really want to thank you for coming
Absolutely.
again. Yeah, this is always fun to talk with you. I really appreciated it.
Yeah.
Well, we'll get you back for,
Let's do
for
it
more.
again.
Yeah, for more conversations about
do beavers
birds
sometime.
and wildlife. Yeah, this is terrific, and I want to thank all of you for joining us. What a great afternoon, and I hope everybody has the happiest of Thanksgiving weekends, and that we're going to take a little bit of a break here ourselves too. We normally have a Thursday broadcast, but it's Turkey Day, so we will not be here. We'll be out watching the turkeys.
All right.
Thank you for coming, and we'll wave goodbye. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving.
Bye.